By the time the third man that week laid a blood money revolver on the scarred walnut counter, Eliza Vale had already decided he would never fire it straight. He smiled when he said he needed something reliable, and there was dried red clay on his boots from the North Road where folks had been finding bodies all spring, face down in the sage with their pockets turned inside out and the backs of their coats dark with old blood. Eliza took the revolver in one hand, felt the balance, smelled lamp oil, steel filings, and the coffee burning slow on the stove behind her, and said, "Reliable for who?" The man's smile thinned. "For me." There were people in Mercy Crossing who still thought Eliza had stayed in the shop because grief had made her too tired to leave it. They said it kindly sometimes, cruelly at others. A widow with broad shoulders, singed fingers, and no patience was easy enough to misread in a town that preferred women soft-voiced and busy with curtains instead of firing pins. But Eliza had learned the inside of a Colt before she learned the inside of a hymn book. Her father had taught her which metal rang true and which lied under pressure. Her husband, Noah, had taught her how to read a man by the way he set a weapon down. Gentlemen laid a gun on wood like they were setting down a sleeping child. Killers let it fall. This one let it fall. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight, by the stove, or in your chair, or with the dishes still waiting. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from. There's something good about knowing who's out there in the dark with us. Then come back to Mercy Crossing, where Eliza's hand was still resting on that revolver, and the whole town had not yet understood what kind of woman they'd been underestimating. "I can make it smoother," she said. "That's so." "Yes." She turned toward the workbench, where the late light from the west window caught on files, springs, and tiny screws arranged neat as prayer beads. "You pick it up tomorrow." He leaned an elbow on the counter. "Sheriff says you're the best between Rollins and Cheyenne. Sheriff says many things when he's drunk." The man gave a short laugh. "It died quick. You know who I ride with?" Eliza slid open the bench drawer without looking at him. "If I did, I'd keep it to myself. Men like being mysteries more than they like being decent." That one earned her a narrow look, but he took the bait of his own vanity. Men like him usually did. "I ride with Silas Rourke." There it was. The name that had been sitting in the town like thunder for months. Silas Rourke owned half the freight line contracts west of Laramie, or said he did, and when a rancher refused to sell him pasture, or a widow refused to sign over water rights, or a witness seemed too willing to speak in court, some hard-faced rider with store-bought ammo and a fresh-oiled gun usually appeared before sunrise. Folks whispered. Nobody testified long. Eliza's thumb brushed the revolver's cylinder. "Then you won't want it by tomorrow. You'll want it by supper." He grinned again, pleased at being important. "That's exactly right." When he left, the bell over the door gave its tired tin rattle. Dust drifted in his wake. Eliza stood very still until the hoofbeats faded. Only then did she breathe. "Was that one of Rourke's?" asked a voice from the stove. Jonah Reed had been sitting there so quiet a lesser person might have forgotten him, but Eliza never forgot a man with eyes like that. Pale gray, steady, watchful. A man who carried silence the way others carried rifles. He had come into Mercy Crossing 6 weeks earlier with a limp, a half-healed scar at his temple, and a little girl asleep in his saddle blanket. He'd asked for work, not charity. Eliza had handed him a broom first, then a crate, then trust in spoonfuls so small neither of them could accuse the other of generosity. "Yes," she said. Jonah looked toward the door. "You're going to do it again." "I already have." She set the revolver under the lamp and reached for her screwdriver. On the cot in the back room, his daughter, May, turned in her sleep and gave a small sigh. 9 years old. Light sleeper unless she was safe. In 6 weeks, she'd only slept that hard inside Eliza's shop and once under the cottonwoods by the creek, while Eliza polished brass and Jonah mended tack nearby. The child's trust had come faster than her father's. Children were braver with their hearts. Jonah rose and crossed to the bench. Up close he smelled of horse leather, clean sweat, and the cold evening air coming in around the ill-fitted doorframe. If he notices before he uses it, he'll come back meaner. If he notices after he uses it, Eliza said, unscrewing the grip plate, he'll be too busy being dead. His jaw tightened. That is not a small thing. No, her voice stayed level. It isn't. She worked with small, exact movements, filing a hair from the sear where a hard pull would slip at the wrong angle, weakening the timing just enough that a rushed second shot would catch and drag, not enough to show at inspection. Just enough to fail a man who intended murder with confidence in his hand. Her father had once told her craftsmanship was honesty made visible. She had believed him right up until Noah died in a muddy lane with an honest pistol in his hand and 2 hired killers walking away alive. Jonah watched her in silence for a long moment. How many? She did not pretend not to understand. 9. His face changed, not with horror exactly, but with the weary recognition of a man who had seen too much of what corners the world could shove a soul into. And how many used them? 7. And the other 2? Maybe they changed their minds. Maybe the Lord found them a different road. Maybe they're still waiting. He set both hands on the bench. The scar at his temple whitened. Eliza, if one of those guns fails in a crowded room. It hasn't. She looked up then, and there was iron in her gaze. I don't sell to men I suspect. I sell to men I know. Men who laugh when people beg. Men who ride out after midnight with whiskey on their breath and rope in their saddlebags. Men who come back missing blood that isn't theirs. He held her stare. Outside, a wagon clattered over the ruts, and someone called for a mule to stand. The ordinary sounds of mercy crossing went on, as they always did, while terrible things arranged themselves in back rooms and behind shut teeth. What happened to Noah? Jonah asked quietly. No one in town asked anymore. They preferred the easier version. Fever, bad roads, Indian raid, whispered only by cowards. Anything but the truth that would require courage from them now. Eliza put the screwdriver down. He told the court what he'd seen. Silas Rourke's men driving the Kessler brothers off their land and setting fire to the hay after. 2 weeks later, Noah was shot on his way home. Gun never cleared leather fast enough. She swallowed once. I repaired both revolvers used in the killing. I remember the serial marks. I remember because one of the men complained the trigger was stiff. Jonah looked at the revolver on the bench as though it might answer for itself. I buried my husband, Eliza said. And the next morning one of the men who did it came in here for a new spring. He called me ma'am. He asked after my appetite. The room went so quiet she could hear the little whine May made through her nose when she dreamed. Then Jonah said the thing no one else had said. So you started burying them back. Eliza looked down at her hands. Burned, nicked, steady, one by one. That was the moment the world changed, though neither of them knew how swiftly. Because while Jonah stood there deciding whether the woman he had begun to need was brave or damned, the bell over the door rattled again, and Sheriff Tom Bell came in carrying a folded paper gone limp from sweat. Eliza, he said, breathing hard. Rourke posted notice at the depot. He's buying out the South Wells. Every holdout signs by Friday, or he'll close the freight road and run their stock off public water. Jonah straightened. He can't do that. Bell gave him a tired look. Can and will are often the same thing when a man owns the judge's poker debts. Eliza wiped her hands on a rag. Who hasn't signed? Mrs. Holloway. The Pritchard boys. Pastor Dunn on behalf of the mission lot. Bell hesitated. And you? She stared at him. Bell cleared his throat. Your husband filed the deed proper before he died. Shop lot runs deeper than folks thought. Strip behind here cuts to the spring channel. Rourke wants every parcel touching water, and that includes your back wall. For a second, all Eliza heard was the hiss of the kettle and the old hurt opening fresh as if grief were not years deep, but waiting just under the skin for the right name. Rourke had taken Noah. Now he wanted the ground beneath Noah's shop, the spring that cooled the forge, the place where every honest thing Eliza had left was anchored. When do I sign? She asked. Bell blinked, surprised. Never, she said, and folded the rag between her palms. That's when. That night the town smelled of coal smoke and coming frost, though it was only early September. Mercy Crossing sat low between the sage flats and the dark first rise of the Medicine Bow foothills, a place people passed through until the railroad made passing profitable and greed decided to stay. Lamps glowed one by one along Front Street. Somewhere a fiddle scraped out a tune that had forgotten whether it meant joy or homesickness. Jonah helped May eat beans from a chipped bowl while Eliza locked the front door and barred it. She moved through the shop by habit, checking windows, checking the back latch, checking the rifle Noah had once kept over the storeroom door, and she now kept loaded beside the broom. Practical rituals. Things a person did when the law had developed a preference for wealth. May looked between them with solemn brown eyes too old for 9. Are we leaving? Jonah paused with his spoon halfway up. Maybe. Eliza set a lantern on the table. Not tonight. The child studied her. You say that like you're talking to a horse that wants to bolt. Eliza almost smiled. Works on some men, too. May grinned, and in that small flash of teeth the room softened. Later, when the child slept again and the shop had gone blue with moonlight, Jonah stood at the back door staring out at the yard where junk iron, wagon rims, and broken harness hardware glinted pale in the dark. You should go, Eliza said. So should you. I own the building. I've lost buildings before. The words came flat and quiet, but they landed heavy. Eliza leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. And people? He did not answer at once. Crickets sang by the creek. Far off, a coyote called. Finally he said, My wife got sick in Nebraska. Scarlet fever took her in 6 days. I left May with her sister while I went to fetch a doctor from Kearney. Flooded bridge kept me 3 hours on the wrong side of the river. He rubbed a thumb across the scar at his temple. When I got back, my brother-in-law said if I'd stayed put, at least the child would have had one parent in the room when the other died. Eliza felt that like a bruise pressed with a thumb. He wasn't wrong, Jonas said. But he was cruel enough in saying it that I never quite knew which part of me to forgive. For a moment neither spoke. The air through the cracked door smelled of wet earth and iron water from the spring. Then Eliza said, Some people think pain gives them the right to be sharp. Mostly it just tells you what they were already made of. He turned to look at her fully. There was the first quotable truth of the night. Simple as a nail and just as clean. Some people think pain gives them the right to be sharp. Mostly it just tells you what they were already made of. Did it tell you? He asked. Yes, she said. It told me I was still dangerous. The next morning began with a hammer on the front door and a voice out loud enough for all of Front Street to hear. Mrs. Vale, open up. Eliza was already awake. Jonah was, too. He was halfway to the rifle when she touched his wrist. No, not yet. She opened the shop to find Deputy Arlen Pike on the threshold, pink-cheeked from borrowed authority and young enough to still believe a badge could wash fear into courage. Behind him, 2 of Rourke's riders sat their horses in the street pretending patience. Pike thrust a folded document forward. Notice of lawful acquisition. Mr. Rourke offers $300 for the premises and spring access. Lawful, Eliza repeated. Signed by Judge Metcalf. After breakfast or before? Pike flushed. You have until Friday. Jonah stepped into view behind her. One of the riders narrowed his eyes. He recognized a capable man when he saw one. The other one spat into the dust. Eliza took the paper and set it, unopened, on the counter. Tell Mr. Rourke I am deeply moved by his concern for my property. Pike lowered his voice. Ma'am, just sign. People get hurt resisting men like him. Her expression did not change. People get hurt complying with men like him, too. We simply call it by nicer names. When they rode off, the whole street seemed to inhale. Mrs. Holloway from the boarding house lifted her curtain and let it fall. The barber stood frozen with his razor in the window. Across the way, storekeeper Levi Munn wiped the same spot on his counter over and over, never once meeting Eliza's eyes. By noon word had spread. By 2, the community had divided itself as communities always do when courage starts charging rent. Some avoided the shop entirely. Some came only to whisper. Pastor Dunn brought bread and left before anyone saw him. Mrs. Holloway sent stew through the back door with May, pretending it was extra. Sheriff Bell came twice and drank coffee both times without tasting it. The hard choice came before supper. Bell put both hands around his mug and said, There's a freight wagon leaving for Laramie at dawn. I can put you and the child on it. Read 2. Quietly. Jonah looked at Eliza. It was the easy road, if not a good one. Safety. Distance. A chance to keep breathing. Rourke would take the shop, the spring, the wells, and every widow and rancher too poor to fight him. But May would live. Jonah would live. Eliza might even keep her skin and call the loss survival. Instead she said, No. Bell closed his eyes. If I go, Eliza continued, he gets what he killed for. That teaches every man watching exactly the lesson he hopes to teach. Jonah's voice was low. And if you stay, then he pays more for it. Bell rose hard enough to slosh coffee onto the table. This town will not back you in a gunfight. I'm not asking it to. That is exactly what worries me. After he left, Jonah stood with both palms braced against the window frame, looking out toward the freight yard where dusk was turning wagons into shadows. You could still go. I know. And if I take May and leave? Eliza did not answer right away. The truth was immediate and unpleasant. She wanted him to stay, wanted his steadiness, his quiet competence, the way the room changed shape around his presence and became less lonely. Wanted May's small shoes by the stove and her questions at breakfast and the chance, ridiculous and dangerous, to keep being needed by people she had not buried yet. You should take her somewhere safe, Eliza said at last, because wanting was not the same as deserving. Jonah turned back toward her. That wasn't what I asked. The loaded silence stretched between them. Then he nodded once, answering himself. All right. He went to saddle the mare after dark. Eliza kept working at the bench because there are griefs so large you can only meet them sideways through labor. She reassembled springs, oiled threads, checked the rifle, counted cartridges. By the time Jonah returned, May was crying in the yard, boots unlaced, hair half-braided, clinging to the saddle horn. She heard me, he said. Good, Eliza replied, and went to the child. May's cheeks were wet and furious. I'm not leaving her. You might have to. No. May. The child's chin trembled. Everybody leaves when bad men come. That landed like lead. Jonah shut his eyes. Eliza knelt so they were level. She could smell tears, dust, and the soap May used only when she remembered. Listen to me, Eliza said. Brave isn't staying every time. Brave is knowing what you can't bear to lose and telling the truth about it. May sniffed hard. What if I can't bear to lose you? Eliza's throat tightened. Then that makes two of us. It was enough. Not to solve anything. Only enough to hold the next hour together. At the end of that long evening, when the lamps were low and the freight whistles moaned from the depot, Jonah sat at the table sharpening a skinning knife because a man sometimes needed a task smaller than terror. Eliza poured them each a finger of whiskey Noah had once hidden from tax men in a flour tin. She said, What would you have done in my place? Signed and run. Or stayed and trusted that a town too frightened to speak might still remember how. If you're listening tonight, you can answer her in the comments, because there comes a point in every hard life when the right choice and the survivable choice stop being the same road. Jonah rolled the knife under the stone a final time. I think, he said, I would have wanted to be the kind of person who stayed. He lifted his eyes to hers. And I think I'm tired of wanting from a distance. That was when the storm truly began. Riders came just after midnight. Not a dramatic charge. Worse than that. Quiet. Professional. Hooves muffled in the packed dirt alley behind the shop. Leather creaking. Men who expected sleeping prey and a simple job. Jonah heard them first and was on his feet before the second boot hit the back fence. Eliza was already reaching for the rifle. May, Jonah whispered. The child was awake, rigid on the cot, not crying, which frightened Eliza more than tears would have. Under the coal bin, Eliza ordered. May slid into the narrow storage gap beneath the forge platform where only a thin child could fit. Jonah dropped beside the back window and eased the curtain a fraction. 4, he murmured. Maybe 5. A bottle shattered against the rear wall. Kerosene ran sharp in the air. Eliza's pulse kicked hard once and settled. They mean to burn us out. The first flame licked orange at the clapboards. Jonah fired through the window. A horse screamed. Men shouted. Another bottle burst. Glass rained. Heat breathed through the cracks. Then everything moved fast. Jonah kicked open the side door and went low into the alley, knife in one hand, revolver in the other. Eliza took the front. A rider crashed through the batwings of the dry goods next door and came up already aiming. She shot first. He spun sideways into a rain barrel and dropped. No time for fear. No time for memory. Just motion. A second man lunged from beside the pump house. Eliza recognized him in the same instant he recognized her. Caleb Dunn, one of Noah's killers. Broader now. More beard. Same eyes. Mean and amused all at once. Well, he said, leveling his pistol. Should have known you'd still be difficult. He fired. Nothing. For half a heartbeat, he looked at the weapon like a man betrayed by his own hand. Then Eliza fired once into his shoulder. He slammed against the fence, gun clattering into the mud. You, he gasped. Yes, Eliza said, and crossed the distance. Me. From the alley came 2 more shots, a grunt, wood splitting. Jonah. She glanced once. Too long. Dunn lunged for the fallen pistol with his left hand. Eliza brought her boot down on his wrist, so hard bone cracked under leather. He screamed. Did Noah scream? She asked. Dunn's face went white. That was the 1 second stillness inside the chaos. The moment the whole past narrowed to a man in the dirt and the woman he had made a widow. Before she could say more, hoofbeats thundered in the street. Silas Rourke himself rode in with 2 men behind him, black coat flaring, silver watch chain bright even in the firelight. Older than rumor made him. Handsome in the careful way of men who spend money looking trustworthy. The worst of them often did. He took in the burning wall, done at Eliza's feet, the dead rider by the barrel, and his mouth curved with something like admiration. Well now, he said, I'd heard Noah Vale married above himself. Jonah came out of the alley bloody at the sleeve with one rider's shotgun in his hands. The last of Rourke's men was bent over in the dirt, trying and failing to stand. Rourke's gaze shifted to him, then to the shop, then to the gathering windows along Front Street, where Mercy Crossing watched from darkness and lace. Funny thing about towns, Rourke said mildly. They believe whatever story survives till morning. He drew his weapon. Eliza saw immediately it was one she had repaired months ago before she understood where some of her work was traveling. Clean blued finish. Ivory grip. Perfect action. No sabotage. She had not yet begun then. Rourke fired at Jonah. Jonah dropped behind the trough. The slug took the pump handle clean off. Eliza fired back. Missed by an inch. Rourke swung his horse sideways, using the animal as moving cover, cool as a man changing partners at a dance. Power revealed itself there, not loudness, not rage. Confidence. He had lived too long in a world that bent. Done, still in the mud, laughed through his teeth. He owns this place, widow. You just ain't signed yet. That was when the revelation came, sharp and whole. Not from genius. From craft. From memory. Eliza looked at the shotgun in Jonah's hands, then at Rourke's revolver, then at the crate half visible in the wagon behind him stamped with her own shop mark. Not old work. Recent. The polished pieces purchased under false names by men who then sold upward to Rourke's crew. He had been buying through intermediaries because he knew. Perhaps not all of it, but enough to be careful. Rourke smiled as if he saw the thought land. You're not the only one who can read patterns. Jonah shouted. Inside. Too late. Rourke fired again. The round punched through the front window and buried itself in the wall inches above the coal bin where May lay hidden. Eliza's vision went cold. She moved before fear could claim her. Not at Rourke. At the wagon. She sprinted low through smoke and sparks, reached the wheel, and hauled herself up behind the seat while shots cracked past her ear. Crate lid loose. Straw packing. 3 revolvers. 1 box of cartridges. Her shop mark. Her hands knew each weapon by finish, by screw wear, by the faint scratch under the loading gate she left when filing too late and tired. These were hers, and all 3 had been meant for Rourke's best men. She grabbed one and threw it to Jonah. Take the brass-handled one. He caught it on instinct, ditched the shotgun, and rose from behind the trough just as one of Rourke's remaining riders came charging. The rider fired. Jonah's new revolver coughed once, then cleaned twice. The rider went over backward into the dust. Rourke wheeled, startled. Eliza held the last 2 weapons. You should have bought local somewhere else. He understood then. Real understanding. The kind that carries insult inside it. You miserable. He shot at her. Wood exploded from the wagon rail. She dropped flat. Then done, bleeding and half mad, managed to drag himself up with his good arm and snatched the 3rd revolver from the wagon bed. He aimed at Eliza from 10 feet away. End of the line, he said, and pulled the trigger. The cylinder locked. His eyes widened. Eliza slammed the 2nd sabotaged revolver into his jaw hard enough to drop him for good. And that was the cliff edge. Rourke in the street, unhurt and furious. Jonah bleeding and exposed. The back wall catching higher flame. May hidden inside a burning shop. Half the town watching behind curtains while the future held its breath. The quiet after violence always felt strange, almost rude, as if the world had forgotten what had just been demanded of it. They got the fire half controlled before dawn because fear will watch a murder, but smoke brings out buckets. Mercy Crossing finally spilled into the street in nightshirts, boots, aprons, suspenders. Men formed a line from the pump. Women beat sparks from the dry goods roof with wet blankets. Pastor Dunn carried May out from the coal bin wrapped in a horse blanket like a rescued saint. Mrs. Holloway took one look at Jonah's arm and started tearing up her own petticoat for bandages before anyone asked. Rourke had fled in the confusion, riding south with only one man left beside him. He'll come back by daylight with deputies bought and papers stamped, Sheriff Bell said, pressing his hat to his chest. He'll say this was self-defense. He'll say done, and the rest were protecting lawful property. Then we need a truth louder than his, Eliza replied. Jonah sat on an upturned crate while she stitched the graze along his upper arm. The skin around it was burned with powder. He never flinched, but the muscle jumped each time the needle pulled through. Dawn laid a pale stripe over the ruined wall, and the whole shop smelled of wet ash, coffee, scorched pine, and blood. May slept at last with her head in Mrs. Holloway's lap. You nearly got yourself killed for a building, Jonah said. Eliza tied off the stitch. No, for a line. He looked at her. Between what and what? Between what men like him can take, she said softly, and what they only think they can. He let out a breath that might have been pain or wonder. Then, after a long silence, he reached into his coat and drew out something wrapped in cloth. He opened it on the crate between them. A little tin horse. Crude. One wool missing. Polished smooth by use. May's, he said. She had it when her mother died. Wouldn't sleep without it for a year. Eliza touched the dented tin flank with one finger. I was going to leave it on your bench and take her out before dawn, he said. Figured if she saw it, she'd know I meant to come back for her once I had somewhere safe. His mouth tightened. Truth is, I've been leaving parts of myself on tables for a long time. Easier than handing them over. She closed her hand around the little horse. It was warm from his pocket. Strange thing about broken people, she said quietly. They can hear each other breathing through walls other folks don't even know are there. That was the line. The one that would live. Small enough to miss if you weren't listening. True enough to stay. Jonah's eyes lowered, then lifted again. Eliza. He said only her name, but she heard the rest in it. Weariness. Respect. Fear. Hope so careful it barely dared stand up in daylight. She put the tin horse back in his palm and folded his fingers around it. When this is done, she said, if you still mean to stay till the road is safe, stay. His voice roughened. I stopped meaning till the road was safe sometime yesterday. If this part of the story is moving you, you are exactly who it was written for. A like and a subscribe is how you tell stories like this to keep finding their way through the dark. Then stay with us, because tenderness is never the end of a Western. It is only the reason the fight matters. By full morning, the town had chosen. Not everyone. Enough. Levi Munn came across the street carrying a ledger with hands that shook. Freight orders, he muttered, never quite looking up. Names. Dates. Ammunition crates billed to fake ranches and rerouted to Rourke's men. He swallowed. I kept copies because numbers make liars nervous. Mrs. Holloway produced a singed handbill from Rourke's earlier threats. Pastor Dunn said he had heard Caleb Dunn boast drunkenly that Noah Vale had died begging, and though that last part was certainly a lie, the confession would do. Sheriff Bell brought the Kessler brothers, who had been hiding in the hills since their eviction. One had seen Rourke's men torch the hay. The other still carried birdshot in his leg from the warning that followed. Courage, once it starts, spreads faster than fear expects. Rourke returned just before noon with Deputy Pike, Judge Metcalf, and 6 armed men. He rode straight down Front Street, as if he owned the planks beneath their hooves. Maybe yesterday he had. This property is under seizure, Judge Metcalf announced from the saddle, voice cracking in the dry air. Bell stepped out beside Eliza. No, sir. This street is under witness. That made Rourke pause. People were everywhere now. On porches. In windows. Along the boardwalk. Not cheering. Better than that. Present. Watching. Harder to kill a truth in public. Harder, too, to bully when every lie needs an audience willing to repeat it. Rourke smiled thinly. All this over a widow's tantrum. Eliza walked to the middle of the street before anyone could stop her. Wind tugged loose strands of hair from her braid. Ash marked one sleeve. She held one of his purchased revolvers by the barrel. You killed my husband for telling the truth, she said, and her voice carried because some truths do not need shouting. Then you sent men here to burn me out and bury the spring deed with the ashes. I have witnesses. I have ledgers. I have the men you hired, one living and one dead. And I have the weapon your rider bought yesterday under your own money. Rourke laughed. And who exactly will hear it? Him. He tipped his chin at the judge. No, said a new voice. Heads turned. The noon stage from Rollins had just drawn up in a storm of dust, and stepping down from it with travel on his coat, and a federal badge pinned under that dust was Marshal Edwin Cross. Narrow-faced, unsmiling, the kind of man the territory sent only when local justice had grown too friendly with local money. Sheriff Bell stared. Who wired him? May raised a small hand from Mrs. Holloway's porch. I did. Sort of. Everyone looked. The child sat very straight, cheeks flushed with the importance of being useful. Last week Mr. Bell let me tap at the telegraph key while he was in the outhouse. I remembered enough letters to send for help this morning when he was at the church. For one beat, there was silence. Then Jonah laughed. Just once. A tired, astonished sound. Rourke's face hardened. This is absurd. Marshal Cross climbed the boardwalk without hurry. Not half so absurd as the packet waiting in my office from the Federal Land Office in Cheyenne. Complaint regarding forged spring access claims, and signed but detailed. He glanced at Eliza. Handwriting clear enough to belong to a man who spent his life labeling parts drawers. Noah. Eliza's breath caught. I received it 2 days ago, Cross continued. Came with copies of deed maps, names of intimidated witnesses, and a note that if anything happened to Mr. and Mrs. Vale, I ought to start with Silas Rourke. The street seemed to tilt. Noah, dead all this time, had still managed to reach forward. Not save her. He could not do that. But leave a trail. Leave a fuse. Rourke went for his gun. That was the final confrontation, and it ended not in luck or rescue, but in the precise shape of who Eliza had become. She did not flinch, did not step back. She knew his draw speed now, knew the slight outward cant of his wrist, the half-breath he took before pressure. More than that, she knew the gun. She had repaired its trigger months ago and remembered the new fault she had introduced last night while he was busy threatening her with notices and fire. Rourke cleared leather and fired. The hammer fell. The cartridge misfired. A soft, dead click in the center of a whole town's hearing. He looked down in disbelief. Eliza took 2 steps forward, gripped his gun hand, twisted hard at the thumb, seemed Noah had once shown her could break a grip quicker than pain, and drove the barrel straight into the dust. Bell and Jonah were on him before his second breath. By the time his men reached for their own weapons, half the town already had rifles aimed from porches and windows. Even Levi Munn. You never truly know a place until it decides what it will no longer tolerate. Rourke was disarmed, bound, and searched. In his coat, they found deeds signed under duress, bribe notes to Metcalf, and a list of properties marked for forced seizure after the first frost. Judge Metcalf went pale enough to show blue at the lips when Cross asked after the poker debts. Deputy Pike cried before anyone accused him of anything, which was a poor look in law enforcement, but a useful one for testimony. Caleb Dunn lived long enough to confess in exchange for a doctor, then learned there are bargains a body cannot outlast. The confession held anyway. So did the ledger. So did the town. By evening, Silas Rourke sat in the jail at Rollins with irons at wrist and ankle, his contracts frozen, his accounts seized pending federal review, his name crawling ahead of him in newspaper ink from Wyoming Territory to Denver. Judge Metcalf resigned before the warrant reached his desk. Deputy Pike turned state's evidence with the speed of a man who had always mistaken fear for prudence. The South Wells stayed with their owners. The spring behind Vale's shop remained hers. 3 weeks later, the back wall was rebuilt better than before. 6 weeks later, Mrs. Holloway complained loudly that Jonah Reed had moved his saddle into Eliza's storeroom before proper appearances could be arranged, while arranging them herself by sending over pies and pretending not to notice that May now kept 2 cups set at breakfast without asking who the second was for. By winter, Mercy Crossing had become the kind of place where people still locked doors at night, but no longer because one man's money said they should be afraid. And months after that, on the first warm evening of April, May sat on the rebuilt back step with her boots off, letting creek water run over her ankles while Jonah planed cedar for a new sign, and Eliza blackened her hands at the forge shaping a hinge that did not need shaping yet. The shop behind them rang with honest work. The cottonwoods had begun to leaf in a pale green haze. Somewhere in town a church bell carried soft in the wind, and supper smelled like onions, bread, and rain coming on dry earth. Jonah set down the plane, crossed to Eliza, and without an audience, without a speech, tucked the old tin horse into her apron pocket like a promise that had finally learned how to stay. She touched his wrist and said, "Funny thing about Mercy. It don't always arrive gentle. Sometimes it sounds like a locked cylinder at the exact right time. He smiled, and beyond them the last light lay warm on the creek, bright as hammered copper and twice as hard won. Next time, we'll tell the story of a woman sent west in disgrace because her wealthy family said no decent man would ever want her scarred face, and the one-armed rancher who looked at her once and saw not ruin, but home.